Dunia, welcome to the Classical Odyssey. I'm so excited to have you here because you're a real-life Indiana Jones, a female version of Indiana Jones. You're an antique dealer, and I will not reveal more about your life because I also don't know much, and I'm really excited to hear more about your journey because your journey is not only very interesting, the way you got to this point, but it also involves a large geographic space. And I think what you will share with us will be very fascinating, educational, and it will just make us want to learn more about what you do, about you as a person. So I will start with the question that I usually start. When do you think the seeds were sown in your life that led you to develop this passion for antiques, and what attracted you to them?
So I grew up in a family of merchants and just trade in general. Both my grandparents and my great grandparents or grandfathers, great grandfathers, were were merchants, and they used to trade between Europe and the Middle East. Um, but antiques, I always thought was a long-term family trade, but it turns out it was just my dad and my uncle who, when they lost their parents when they were 16, so they were very young. They had a lot of brothers and sisters, and they tried different trades. And then one day, my uncle said, "Antiques, it's beautiful, it's adventurous, and there's good buyers for it." And so they both started and got their other brothers into it. And we had a shop, or they had a shop in Baghdad that was one of the most famous shops in the trade, and they built their names at a very young age. So I grew up. Our first house in Baghdad was full of. We left when I was 4, but I have very vivid memories from those years. Always, antiques darken the home because they absorb light, they absorb
Mhm.
energy, they give energy, and I love that. I mean, darken in a calming sense. So our homes were always dark furniture and beautiful engravings and beautiful embroideries and silver that reflects lights and crystals. So I never really put the two together, but I've always had an obsession with history and this kind of longing for the past. And I always worked with my dad. So when we moved here when I was 9, and so around the age of 15, at that time he was in the famous Portobello market that's now kind of died down. So at that age, I used to go to work with him on a Saturday and meet people and see the stuff that he's buying. I used to go to fairs and markets with him, go early in the morning. Um, but I didn't really have an interest in it. And for years, my dad was just saying, "But you love everything old. You're obsessed with history. And I only watch period dramas and I only read old books. I love old furniture and museums." He said, "Imagine this as a career." And you know what? I think at this age, especially, so I tried different things. I studied fashion. I studied animation, which was my own passion. Um, I um, I even studied coding for a while, and I worked in a company. And I think at this
Wow.
age, what's coming out is, first of all, this I've always had this like desperate longing for home because, of course, we left at a really young age when we never went back, there's no homes to go back to. So I've kind of translated that into this obsession with my current family now. So it's my mom and my dad and my brother. And every time I veer away from the business, I go back and just kind of feel relief.
You miss
Um,
it.
yes, yeah, working with my family, it gives you a larger purpose than just kind of serving a corporation. Um, and Yeah, it's this kind of, I guess I spent my whole life longing for the past, and now I get to do that for a living. I get to hold on. I spent my whole life resisting letting go of the past, and now I get to, as a living, just hold on to it and pass it on to other people. I'm allowed to do that because I guess, maybe for our mental health, we're usually discouraged from holding on to the past. But when you're an antique dealer, that's what you
It's
do.
a thing that you hear very often because if you thinking about the past, if you invest too much of your, let's say, mental real estate into things that have happened that are behind you, and people would think that this is a very pessimistic way of thinking, and you're stuck in the past, you don't allow yourself to live in the present. But at the same time, it's not true. I mean, you're not there because of nostalgic reasons necessarily. Obviously, it's nostalgia plays a very important role, but this is the stairs of civilization that led us to the place we are. So we're just honoring those things in order to also project a future. It doesn't work without the past. So this is really beautiful. And also wanted to emphasize what I think it's obvious, because how you were describing, um, I think the Orientalist aesthetic is exactly how you describe it. It's dark because of the ornaments, but it's beautiful. It's harmonious at the same time. And I think about the thick Persian carpets, or everything is, there's so much attention to detail in a very decorative way. You have pieces just that they add, they're just there for the sake of decoration. They don't necessarily there for function. They're not simplified. You don't sacrifice details, and that's something that I really I find fascinating.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more on, this is so rare, and I find this so lovely that you're working with your family, you're working with your dad. This is an inherited passion. You grew up into it, which is beautiful. And unfortunately, a lot of people in this generation reject it because they think I want to do my own thing. But this doesn't really work like that. You have so many advantages, and you're almost ahead of your age if you were to start from scratch. How is it for you to work with your dad? You said some things, but
Yeah, it's look, but I will say, I think there's a misconception that, especially let's say the Arabic woman is often kind of her identity is erased, but and it's a very Western thing to be an independent woman, and maybe that's true today culturally, but I especially was raised. My family's Muslim, and my dad always raised me to remember that the foundations of Islam is to read and think and meditate. So you have to read, take in, learn, and you have to think. And so I was raised to value my independence and my privacy, so that I come up with my own thoughts and ideas. And because I was given that freedom, um, and I was never told what to study, I was never told what field to go into, I was comfortable to gravitate towards working with my family. And me and my dad are very close. He's like my best friend. Of course, it's really hard to work with family. There's a lot of struggles, but um, yeah, I mean, he raised me to be an independent thinker. We read a lot, we philosophize, we think. He raised me to love classical music, and he taught me everything about the world's history. And I think I told you before, I'm not very good with dates or
mhm.
names, but what that did to me was I grew up filled with stories. So nothing is simple for me, not even a table. And he always taught me to stop and smell the flowers and then consider the humanity of the flower. So when we look at trees, for example, he's like, there's a whole, empire of animals with their own life systems. And so it's hard to find people that think like that. And so we, of course, spend a lot of time together, but to be able to work together means that my life is just a little bit less painful. It's difficult in some ways, but I get to spend my difficult working hours with not someone who shares my love um, for the world and its beauty. And also, this is quite a sad thought that I think about a lot, which is my parents are what I call the final true Iraqi generation. And once they're gone, the generations, our generation and the generations after us, will never really know what it is to be Iraqi, because the country and its culture and its history is almost eradicated. So that's also something that I think I have to hold on to and take advantage of, and really spend as much time with him as possible, and then get to take that onto my life, whether it's my children or my nieces and nephews, and into the wider community. Also, the fact that I feel proud. It's kind of like, we've lost the art of passing on a trade and passing on a skill. So craftsmen and we don't really do that anymore. Like you said, people want to be independent, so they veer away from traditional crafts and trades, especially passed down from their families. And I think now, there's a lot of talk about sustainability and globalization and how do we step away from that and slower living. And I think one of the first steps is, of course, we don't all have that privilege, and sometimes it's not a privilege, but look at your family, look what they were interested in, even if it's not a craft, sorry, even if it's not a trade, it could be a craft. This is how you said, like, it's the steps of civilization, which I really love. This is how we build on the past and we kind of keep our humanity intact, because we're just kind of, now we're a bit lost and soulless and we just buy and don't really know what we're doing. And this is the kind of, a way to build on our ancestors, um, globally, not just, like, I'm not saying the Arabic ancestors or whatever, but just our ancestors as a humanity.
It was there's so much sadness, but beautiful things. Unfortunately, in this life, to me, they always have this sad component as well,
Yeah,
because they make us think about how little we have to spend time with.
yeah,
And I was just thinking about the upbringing that you had was rather scholastic, which I appreciated so much. It sounds like um, what it used to be in Romania many years ago, maybe 100 years ago, classical education or being taught at home. And I had this recurring talk with many people that I interact with, the passing on of knowledge. And because we disrupted that, we have this huge vacuum. It's both philosophical, but also in terms of crafts, we lost so much of the craft that the people had in the arts, specifically because we talk about the arts 100 years ago, which is not very long ago in history, and we have so much um, written. We've recorded pretty much everything, that can give us the tools to recreate or continue the craft. But just because we've rejected the generations before us, rebelled against the ancestors, so to say, nowadays, um, we uh, we got to this. We plafonated in a sense. So I
yeah,
think the world will get to some sort of saturation because we see the likes that we have, we see the vacuum, and we want to go back. And that's really beautiful because it's what your dad was showing you, as well as the transcendent substance of reality, and just to build this sensibility and this because he was refining your soul, I think, in so many ways in that
say
approach.
one thing which is important.
Hmm.
You said classical education.
Yep.
This is a very important point, because for me, because we were immigrants, I didn't really get to have that kind of traditional classical
Hmm.
education that I would have got in Iraq, or like a lot of people, it's would have got here. It's a bit of it can be considered a classist system, but actually, for me, it just came from my dad, and for him, it just came from books and record players and movies. So we need to, I loved what you said, which is, it's like the refining of the soul, that's and passing down knowledge, which is supposed to happen within families and tribes and communities, rather than just in schools. They send their children off to boarding schools, which can be amazing, but it we have forgotten that it's something that happens within families, rather than something we pass on to our teachers, and it's available to everyone.
That's a very profound remark. And I sometimes use classicism in its broader sense,
Yeah,
because obviously you think about classicism studying the old languages, Greek and Latin, and then studying authors and the Renaissance art and classical Greeks and so on and so forth. But it could be also nation specific or culture specific. It could be classical
yeah,
Iranian or something, Persian
yeah,
history. And the proximity that you built or the relationship that you built with your cultural past is the strongest when it's pursued in the family and through the
yeah.
family as a whole unit, which is so beautiful and so refreshing to hear. Many of us were absolutely longing for this, and I also
Yeah.
had the same experience with my parents because most of my um, let's say interests in history in the natural world, they came from being just simply being exposed or having been bought a book for children with Greek legends or about animals and being explained how the world is. It's really beautiful. Um, so
To hear that.
I we will go back, I think, throughout the conversation to these great, grand ideas, so to say, the big questions of life that we eventually come to while studying beautiful arts and traditional arts. But I wanted to ask you some more technical questions. So you are an antique dealer. Can you give us a deeper glimpse into your life? How does your life look like? How is the adventure? What's the adventurous component? And how do you go about the logistics, the
How do you,
negotiating,
yeah.
the exploring?
Look, it used to be much more adventurous, and I've only become independent in the trade recently. So I'm still learning and I'm still cautious. Um, I usually call my dad and I say, I found a good deal. And is this a good deal? Shall I negotiate with him? Should I trust him? Even down to, like you said, logistics. Shall I get it delivered or shall I drive up to buy it, to carry it myself? And he, he struggles between just instantly saying, oh, wait for me, I'll come back and I'll check. And then sometimes saying, take the risk. And so I will buy this piece. And then 5 years down the line, oh, it still hasn't sold. Oh, what does this mean? Okay, for me, I see some pieces as a long-term investment. So you can sell it later because I see him doing that. We have some pieces we've had for a decade. But then for him, he says, no, because when you're starting out, you need to be buying and selling. You need to get the build up energy. So I have my own struggles when it comes to how you actually do it, because I've always followed him. And so when we first, let's say 10 years ago, um, it used to be much more adventurous. So you used to have to get on a plane or get on a train and go to the cities or the auction houses or the antique fairs and really touch everything by yourself. And then you find a bargain. I forgot exactly what the rug was, but my dad went to an auction house and there was a big auction. Everyone's fighting for all the pieces, all the expensive pieces, and he found a rug thrown at the back. And they said, "We're not even going to try to sell it." And he flipped it over and he found golden thread, and it turned out it belonged to a Chinese emperor from a certain dynasty. I can't remember the story.
Fantastic. Mm-hmm.
And so, as a dealer, what you do is, oh, what is this piece? Okay, sure. How much is, if it's being undervalued, so you undervalue it. Okay, sure, I'll buy it. But of course, for him, jackpot, this is the dream. And then, of course, comes the struggle of, this piece is magnificent. I own a piece of history. How can I possibly sell it? And you have to keep reminding yourself, this is what I do for work. So I can't collect these things for
Yeah.
myself. I really struggle to let things go. And he's like, Dunia, you're not buying for yourself. And it's kind of nice because it's kind of, like retail therapy. We all love to buy things. We love to collect things. And as a dealer, I get to buy things more than I could even afford because actually I sell them on. So I have them in my presence and I get to learn from them and experience them for a few months or a few years. And then I can sell them on and pass them on to someone else, and keep my trade going. So now it's become, unfortunately and fortunately, most things happen online. So now when we used to get in the car and drive for 3 hours, 4 hours and go to auctions, and it's bustling and everyone knows each other and there's people from around the world. The hands are going up. And then even sometimes when you win a piece, people will huddle around you at the end and they say, please, please, I'll buy it for anything, please, because they lost. So it was a very, you had to learn to be quick on your feet and also negotiate. Sometimes what would happen is dealers would know that, for example, a group of them are going to want the same piece. So what they do is they get together and they decide, okay, we all bid on it together. One of us wins it. We all sell it and share So it was also more of a community, a competitive community, but also a really nice community. Now, because all the auctions are online, I go now and it's just a bunch of phones and you can
That
hear a
transitioned
pin
into the online sphere beginning with 2020, right? It's not something that started before, or it
drop.
gradually moved
No,
because it
auction
was.
houses, I think I would say maybe 7 years ago.
Okay, so it was already the tendency there.
It was already, and then 2020. Look, what happened in 2020 is it's kind of a problem for dealers is that buyers started discovering online auctions.
Okay,
So
that
before
changed.
2020, exactly, before 2020, the dealers, their life changed because now, again, like I said, it's good in a way because now you don't have to travel across the world. And, especially if you're tired or you have obligations, you can just sit online and find amazing pieces. But this is negative in two ways. One, which is, do you remember the carpets in the storage room? You can't see the carpets in the
Mhm.
storage room. If it's a piece of silver that they've named um, Syrian white silver or white metal, sorry, you're not going to be able to handle it by your hand and realize it's actually Iraqi silver, So you kind of have to try and take a guess. We still go to auction houses to do viewings. So if we find a piece online, we go to see it ourselves. This is where your expertise comes in. And this is also where you learn if you don't have an expertise by touching and feeling. But the other negative thing is, like I said, is that now buyers just go buy them from the online auctions themselves. And yes, it's fine because you get to save a bit of money, but you lose, it's just even going to the supermarket, your local farmers market is so enriching and it's so good for your soul and for the community. So I'm against sitting at home and just ordering groceries from Ocado, as luxurious as it may feel. So then imagine with antiques. I mean, you're buying these magnificent historical pieces and spending a lot of money. Don't you want to remember this moment with an interaction with the person who hunted it down for you? It's a beautiful trade and a beautiful hobby to take part in. So if you're a collector, and if we take the dealer out of it, it becomes a little bit sadder. So that's the change now. So now you're saying, what is it to be a dealer? I'm struggling with this a bit because I find that a lot of the time I'm just at home on my laptop, just scrolling through hundreds of pages of items trying to catch one thing.
So it's very
Um,
solitary right now.
Yes, which is
Mhm.
why it's nice to have my dad because we get to do it together and I can send him pieces and we discuss it. But also, what I'm trying to take it as is, I was saying to you earlier that to spend your life researching is beautiful. So I kind of think of it like okay, then I get to read about beautiful things all day. Because what you do is you find a piece and then you dive into the internet or into your books to research it. And then the second half, which is the one I'm learning now and struggling with, is the online world of selling. So look, I now have access to a world of buyers instead of just having a shop on the high street and hoping someone will come in. But how do people find you online? Social media. And so I love posting on social media. I write a lot, I make videos, and I use music, but with antiques, I'm really struggling. There aren't even I follow antique dealers, and they're kind of what they do is they show you the piece and tell you the information. I don't feel that's true to who I am, and so I am struggling to transition into that part of who I am, which is someone who sells outside of making deals with people, and mostly what I do is I contact auction houses, and so I take the pieces to them and I say I have this piece, and then we get it into the auction, which is it's a great way to start, and it's a great way to also learn how to value your pieces. But at some point you have to become an independent uh, an independent seller, but you have to start selling to collectors. You have to find them and you have to sell to them.
So you basically have two ways of selling. It's independently or through auction houses. And
Yes.
I had this. You're talking about how I mean the procedural part of the logistics and everything. It sounds like a high risk business because um, surely there must be some sort of indicators to know whether the piece of art, the antique is authentic, and you have to be able to identify where it's coming from. So it's so much, it's a big data problem already. And I wanted to ask you whether you specialize in a specific era or there's some common things, which is very hard for me to imagine if there's something common throughout all eras that are interesting for the market from, let's say, the antique ancient Egypt to the Victorian period. Are there some things, some, I don't know, qualifiers, be it in the person who sells them or in the objects themselves?
The person who sells them. Okay, I'll think about that one. Um, Look,
It might not be
so
relevant, but I
no,
was
no,
curious.
it is. I just never thought about it. But it is something, of course, I think about in my day to day when we're doing it. Um, so again, it's different online, which is why I can never really completely disregard social media, because even though it's, at the end of the day, I didn't want to have a TV show about antiques, or maybe I did. But I think if you're looking online, follow people with a social media presence, because their content will be educational. And if their content's educational, sometimes, like, I follow this one dealer who he will hold up beautiful pieces and he'll say, look, I think it's from this era. I don't really know, but it's beautiful. And he'll show you how it's crafted. You can trust him to sell you a really high quality, beautiful piece.
So
And then,
that's
of
a
course,
green flag.
yes, exactly. That love and passion for the beauty of these pieces, even if the dealer cannot tell you where it's from or how old it is exactly. And because, of course, what we're trying to support is the preservation of these pieces, and also passing them on to the next generation. But then, of course, a lot of collectors are looking for a specific era, specific objects, specific makers and designers. Then you go to specialists. And again, if you're online, find them on social media. They'll usually, again, have educational content, so videos, or a lot of dealers have newsletters. So I'm trying also to get into that, which is writing articles about certain makers and eras and styles. And I think with auction houses, you don't really need to. So I always say, go to your local ones, because, for example, we had a beautiful Christie's auction in South Kensington, and they had a restaurant, and the atmosphere was amazing. But Christie's, Bonhams, Sotheby's are one of the big ones, and it's better to support the smaller ones. So when this branch closed down, we were very sad, because we had a lot of history and memories there, me and my dad and the whole area. But actually, I was talking to an auctioneer the other day, and he said it was amazing because 10 new small auction houses popped up, family auction houses. So usually auction houses are opened by dealers. They just kind of want to sell for other dealers. And again, you're helping the community, and what you're doing is you're gaining because, okay, that's the other thing. Yes, a very, very, very wealthy collector is going to go to Bonhams or Christie's or Sotheby's to sell their collections, for example, if someone had passed away in their family. But of course, there are, thousands of collectors that are selling collections, or even people who never really collected, but they have a few valuable pieces. They will go to the smaller auction houses because there's less handling fees and kind of ways to lose money, I guess. So when you're buying, it's better for you as a buyer, and you're going to find more interesting kind of under the radar stuff. So if, even, for example, let's say you're looking for Orientalist art, Sotheby's, the big houses, you're going to find the big names, which are amazing and they're incredible. And even if you can't afford them, to go and see them is breathtaking. But all the other auction houses will sell you the lesser known ones. They will have signatures. They'll be able to tell you if it's a print, if it's a reproduction, or if it's real. But you're going to be able to collect these beautiful paintings by, the hundreds of artists that traveled the Arabic world in the 1800s that didn't really become that famous, but their work is just as beautiful. So you can get it more affordable and also keep their legacy going. So yeah, in terms of auction houses, smaller, and in terms of dealers, expertise or just a genuine love for beautiful objects. Yeah,
I wanted to
one
ask
question?
you, what are the, is there a specific historical era that you're focusing on, that you're
Oh,
specializing on, that you develop skills to
yeah.
identify objects? Because it's so
So
complex, the whole thing.
It is very, yeah. And this is what you really struggle with. And for years, I say to my dad, I don't know. I'm reading books and stuff, but how do you know? And he's like, you just have
You
to
feel
touch
it.
them and feel them. Yeah, exactly. And because I grew up, um, I mean, you'll understand this more than anyone because of your work. But because I grew up drawing and painting, even just in a very very simple way, and I loved animation. Um, Something that was just natural to me is always understanding what is a print, what is a high quality painting, what is a low quality painting. So I kind of understand what he means is that I never studied, I didn't really study painting officially, or especially I didn't study, historical paintings. So not just the act of painting, but also the act of identifying and understand paintings. But it's something I accumulated over the years. So with everything else, this is how you understand when it comes to porcelain, the weight of the porcelain, if it's ceramic or fake. Um, let's say with ceramics, especially, for example, German and French, Meissen and Sèvres, let's say, to this day, it's very, very difficult to tell an authentic piece. So, because the signatures have been forged so perfectly. Now, of course, every once in a while, you'll find a magnificently intricate vase that takes your breath away. And they're very rare. And so, of course, it's Sèvres. When that's the signature is Sèvres, of course it is. There's no doubt. They're very hard to get a hold of, but there's thousands of pieces that could be. So then I say, okay, then, and you'll notice auction houses will always say style, Sèvres style, because they just can never really guarantee. Um, and so what you can do, which is, for example, what me and my dad have worked in for years, is again, for example, the feel of the sound it makes
Yeah.
and the way it holds in your hand, but also the intricacy of the work. You can tell if someone has done it by hand, if someone has spent a lot of time, or if someone had done it quickly.
You can tell by
It's
the quality of the craftsmanship. That's a big differentiator. And if you need to have a lifetime invested in it in order to be able to create something that was done,
exactly,
especially the Orientalist paintings, they're so hard to replicate. I think
yeah,
it's easy to spot, especially in that regard. For me, I would find it easy. And
yeah,
also, you pointed out because intuition plays such an important role. Knowledge is obtained also by gaining information, but also by developing this sense that is very hard to describe, which is at the level of our intuition. But it's very often as accurate as being able to practice the actual knowledge, factual knowledge, so to say, that you've
yeah,
assimilated so far. It's
yeah.
hard
So
to describe it otherwise. Yeah.
yeah, which is why I struggled for years. Which is why the craft is that you'll usually find dealers or people who just fell into it, and you can't really learn it. I've been, for me, for example. So I was going to say that I for years was begging my dad, I want to focus on European furniture. There's nothing I love more. And he's saying, yeah, but he specializes in ceramics for the buyers, but for him, silver and Orientalist rugs, which you've mentioned. I find this very difficult. He is begging me to get into it, but I love them. They're beautiful. I've been working with him for years, but the stories, every time he flips one over and explains it to me, and the thread, for example, like you can tell if the thread is really tightly woven, this is very high quality. If it has silk in it, you reading the stories around, because usually they tell stories. Um, but this really, really takes decades. So I was, for me personally, I was focused on European furniture because that's something I naturally really, really love. So when I see a piece, I know if it's good quality or if it's not, because if it's as if I'm buying for myself. And then, of course, the more you read, the more you understand that. For example, learning to differentiate, learning to notice the, do they call them? For example, the screws that hold the different wood pieces together.
Mhm.
That helps you differentiate the different eras. Also helps you identify replicas. So, before screws were more primitive, so they would be kind of rough and uneven and they would stick out. And if they're smooth and sitting inside, you can find the most beautiful piece. And then you look at the screws and it looks like someone had made it yesterday, even if it's really high quality. And then, of course, instantly you realize. But I will say, now I am shifting a little, and I find it hard to step away from European antiques. So even when it comes to something Middle Eastern, I'm always drawn to. I love Orientalist art, like we were talking about. Um, and like I said, not the. I mean, of course, I have my favorite big names, but I love all the pieces that I find, even by the names that we don't know, because for me it's a clash of cultures, not a yes, it's a clash of cultures that explodes in this kind of kaleidoscope of magical worlds. But also for me, it's a time that's gone and it's never going to come back. It's hard to find kind of what's the word? It's hard to find hints of our history in Arabic countries because the region has been in conflict for decades. And so, and also, in the 1800s, it was not in its golden age, it's past the golden age, but it was still it's
A
still kind
peak,
of,
I
yes,
would say.
exactly. Not the peak. It was kind of fading, but let's think of Tokyo before World War II. It was really, really Japan, and then of course shifts after the conflict. So the Orientalist paintings, yes, they're painted by Europeans, but these are people who either traveled there or lived there and they painted it because they fell in love with it. So I get to see a world that has not really been recorded other than in writing, but not visually. I get to see it and I get to see the world I would have been born into. I get to experience the colors and the textures. And sometimes someone who's outside of what you have appreciates it more than you do. So we appreciate different cultures more than the people within the
That's so
culture.
true. That's so
Yeah.
true.
So I love Orientalist art, and the difficulty as a dealer is trends go up and down. So of course you have your specialty, but until you have a really, really solid name, you kind of have to follow the market so that you're buying and selling what's
So you
what's needed.
constantly have to adapt and you constantly have to learn and educate yourself, which is also such a beautiful thing to do. It's
Yeah,
difficult, but it's growing you as a person as well.
yeah,
It's fascinating, and I had these deep thoughts. I think this summer more than ever before. What you mentioned. I mean, I'm from Romania,
yeah,
and Romania deeply is a deeply rural culture, I would say. The culture stems from the rural environment, from the village life, which was flourishing culturally because we have such a strong oral culture of transmitting ballads and songs, and everything was recorded by word of mouth and transmitted from generation to generation through the families. And I think the traditional village was preserved roughly in the same form for centuries up until very recently. And every time I go back to Romania, I see this huge disruption, and I feel like some things were able to be preserved for almost 2,000 years. I mean, I might exaggerate, but some things I do believe that were preserved for that long. At least they had some sort of systemic continuity because you keep the system there, the mentality, the social life, and all these values. And now, because of the globalization, the post-communist era, the thirst for freedom, access to internet and technology, it feels like for the first time in history we have such a radical change without the
mm,
possibility to ever going back. And I think it's even more dramatic in your case. I like to think about history as a stochastic graph instead of a bell curve,
yeah,
because things come back. This kind of it's the myth of the eternal return. I don't know if you heard
yeah.
about this expression. It's actually a book written by a Romanian author. Um,
Myth of the eternal return. It's amazing.
yes, the myth of the eternal return is Mircea Eliade. Um, I'll probably write it in the description.
We find it in English.
Yes, he wrote in English a lot.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna
I
read
think he
that.
was written in English or French first, and then translated
Yeah,
into English and then Romanian. So,
yeah.
uh, So it's really sad. But I wanted to ask you, and we talked about it before. So this is a very broad question. So whichever direction you go is perfect. What do these pieces, these antiques that you're collecting, that you're fascinating? Think about your favorite antique that it was most difficult for you to let go of. What do you think that taught you about humanity? Humanity now or in the past?
Mm. Okay, I'm thinking of a piece. I haven't sold it yet, so I get to enjoy it for a little bit longer. It's a piece of art from the 60s by an Iraqi sculptor. Um, but I'm not really going to talk about the piece. It's more the fact that he's a creator. And I think even the older pieces, or for, now there's a monopoly on all industries. And you were saying, especially like not just in the country or in a certain country, but like you said, globally. So before, there were so many different let's say furniture makers or dressmakers or glass makers or crystal makers, because people, the economy was kind of running on small businesses, or many small businesses, and like we said, families passing on their trade and their crafts. When you are surrounded by these pieces, you realize that it's within human nature. It's the need to create. We all create, whether you write or you sing or you cook or you paint, whatever you do. It's not necessarily, it is a creative pursuit, but it's not just for creative people. But when you're a child, you learn very quickly in school that these are frivolous pursuits, when of course they're not. So when you're surrounded by antiques, and when you're always dealing with antiques, and you see the difference between what was created back then, from the simplest hat rack to the most, a wardrobe, which is something that used to be created so beautifully. It was really, here you have an opportunity to create real beauty and really put your stamp on it, no matter the price, because you have big pieces of wood that are going to take up space in the home. And now I don't have to tell you what the average wardrobe looks like. People need to create, and this is how we pass on who we are. Like you said, it's almost like the point of no return. Suddenly we've just kind of discarded everything, and we don't have creators. And well, if you look at social media, everyone is now an influencer, content creator. But this is people channeling that need for creativity that they're no longer taught. Women say, I don't cook, I don't need to cook. And because we're trying to fight against, the classical way of, or kind of gender norms or whatever, however you want to look at it. It's all quite silly, but we are being taken away from that. Men kind of, men and women, but I'm saying, if I'm talking about traditionally, men would rather go into a corporate job than go into carpentry, for example. There's a prestige with that. People have always been after prestige, but before, people were happy to be within the families and the lives that they were born into, and this created a lot of beauty. Now we're all just aiming for the same thing. Everyone wants to be famous, but really on a smaller scale, everyone wants to be a lawyer and live in that house and have that car and be with those people. And so we're not spending time alone, we're not reading, and we're not creating. So I don't know what's happening to humans. Like I said, we're channeling it into content creation, but then what? We can't. What do the antique dealers of the future sell? Just, things made before 1940. That's it. Is this where we stop? I don't know.
That's exactly my thought. I went to Crete this summer.
Yeah,
I love Crete. I love
yeah,
the Minoan civilization. It's probably one of my favorite.
yeah.
Aesthetically, it's so beautiful and optimistic, and it just makes me happy. It's so refined. And I was looking at the ceramics, the ritons, the big vases, and I was thinking these were created 3,000 years ago. They survived 3,000 years, and it feels like there's no as if it happens yesterday somehow. It feels like I can relate so well with the people back then, and I can understand how they looked at nature in such an unfiltered way, being focused on the wonder of existence without being distracted by all these fast things. And they were focused on their craft. They were focused on doing what they were doing to the best of their abilities without thinking about what we think about, this
Mm.
fast glory that disappears as fast as we obtain it. And
Yeah.
what are we going to talk about in 200 years from now? Are
And
we going to talk about the NFTs? The virtual world is fascinating, is accessible, but how sustainable is it? How much can we preserve of our creations from this time in the centuries to come, if we have centuries ahead of us? It's interesting because it's considered primitive what other people did, and this is considered a societal advancement. Yet it doesn't last. It's almost like an illusion. I mean, I don't want to discredit everything, but in terms of creative pursuits of humanity, I think you pointed out, I think, to the core of the problem.
I read somewhere the other day, or it was a talk maybe. Someone was saying that he was quite worried that nothing we're doing, nothing we're making now is being recorded. Nothing is tangible. Sorry, none of our music, no pieces of music. Music is not written on paper anymore. It is not recorded on record players anymore. Art is not being made physically. Books are not being written physically. So, like you said, what are we actually preserving from who we are? And you cannot see who we are. So, let's say, for example, ancient civilizations, the only thing remaining from them is, drawings on the wall or ceramics, found objects in the home. But I don't think you can tell anything about our civilization now or who we are as a people from our homes, because I don't think we put thought into what we put into them. Or if we do, the makers and the craftsmen now, if you can call them that, don't put thought into what they're making anymore. So when you look, if we're all under the rubble in 10,000 years and they're excavating, is an IKEA what's going to be left, screws, and I don't know. I mean, of course, I understand this is not to relate anything to people's financial situation or anything like that, but even, I've been learning about the first primitive pieces of furniture in Europe, and apparently the concept of a chair didn't exist. You just had a stool for the most privileged person in the household, the highest person in the household. But the stool will tell you everything about how these houses were run. And these stools survived somehow. Like you said, how did these ceramics survive? Because nature survives. But, fake wood and plastic and stuff survives in a negative way. But I don't think we'll be able to talk about who we are now. They won't be able to learn much about who we are now.
It's wow, the ceramics that you were mentioning. I personally love ceramics, and I collect ceramics. Whenever I go to a museum, I buy traditional ceramics
Yeah.
from replicas, museum replicas. I love that.
Yeah.
But as an artist, I really aspire to do more historical illustrations. And if I talk about even my geographic region, Romania, which is back in time is the larger Thracia, Dacia, the Balkans, the Greek ceramics, the Greek pottery, it's fascinating because all the scenes, there's like small frescoes that they give you so much information about how people lived, how they dressed, how they perceived beauty. You see elegance, you see postures that were elegant, even that you can
Yeah.
see, which is so fascinating.
You
And
know,
yes,
sorry, sorry.
no, continue, continue.
No, I was just going to say that, even now, for example, we don't teach people don't understand the art of just painting a flower or painting a field. And when you look at, like, for example, ancient ceramics and how, let's say, primitive the way they drew flowers was, but it actually wasn't. It was creative and
Not at all.
illustrative. We can see how we are looking through their eyes. If Tudor paintings are dark, we can tell that this is coming from somewhere internal. If if ancient Mayan carvings were kind of comical and cartoony, okay, there must have been something quite light about that civilization, despite the dark stories that we hear. They must have been quite whimsical if the flowers look like this and they're. It tells us so much about who we are. But if we don't paint flowers anymore, you know, or just people in a normal setting, like you said, you know, we learn about postures or what they like to wear, or, you know.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I also wanted to ask you, which is, I know it's a rather difficult question, and beauty itself is a very difficult thing to approach because when you talk, let's say on a daily basis, you talk to people in various contexts and you ask them, what do you think beauty is? And they're going to think that you're asking them about yeah, a supermodel from the 90s or something like that. I don't know. I'm just giving you this example, but beauty is something very difficult to describe. Yet when we see it, and it is truly beautiful, it's universal, it's transcultural, it's atemporal, it's independent of all these factors that surround us right now in this time. So therefore, it does have the subjective component. And I think beauty as a philosophical category is something that we can't really exhaustively define. Yet we have indicators of it through the art that is created. And it's also to back up somehow back my question up is, you know, beauty, all these objects that you talk about, which is so fascinating, the ornaments in our life, they don't have a function. They're not necessary to exist for us to live on a day-to-day basis. However, they're so important in teaching us things that are immaterial, yet they're more important than the material reality, which is, what is the meaning of our lives? Where do we come from? Where do we go? Why do we live on this earth? And it's only these things that have no utilitarian use or immediate use. These are the things that actually teach us the deeper questions of life and the answers thereof.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, how do you define beauty through the prism of your profession, your passion, your interest, through these small objects?
Beauty is things, or that which is created with love and care. There's like humanity in it, even if it's something, let's say, ugly, the subject is ugly, but it's still created with love and care. Because I think whether you believe in God or Mother Nature or just the randomness of the universe, I think we can all agree that Earth and the cosmos were created with such love and care, you know? The intricate details and just the colors and the patterns, the mathematical patterns, nothing was random, nothing was by accident, you know? Everything was create, you know, because you can think about, oh, flowers are colorful so that they attract bees, so that the bees pollinize them. But okay, it could have happened in any other way. They could have just pollinized them, but they didn't. Someone or something or somehow, flowers are beautiful so that the bees can find them, and then we get to enjoy the flowers. Can you imagine a world without flowers? So that's, yeah, when you're touching a vase that just makes you, you know, like giddy with joy because of something, because it's got an iridescent color pattern and a little scene, you know, someone has created that to make you happy or to make you think or to kind of talk to your soul rather than just say, oh, please buy this, you know. And kind of like a chef cooking something out of with love for you to experience a certain experience. So I think the objectivity of beauty can be simply defined as something that is made with love and care. Even, for example, you were saying, for example, people think, oh, 90s supermodel. Okay, but what is that? What is the beauty of that? It's something that was created with love and care. It's an image that was created with love and care. And there was a documentary on Apple TV now about the famous, you know, four. And I watched it and I was like,
I
yeah,
didn't.
and
I didn't watch it yet.
it's I loved it because you realize that we thought this was a shallow thing where these women were just happened to be born beautiful and then we all worship them. But actually, it was a whole thing that was created. These women created this image, and it was a fleeting moment in time because they talk about racing with time so that they know that they only have their beauty that was again created by nature but curated by them, us as people. So the reason we love those women and the reason we admire them is because they put love and care into what they are. A child is beautiful because nature has made them beautiful. Nature has created them with love and care. But a woman or a man is beautiful later on because they choose to the way you dress and the way you present yourself. You're not doing it for you, you're doing it for other people. But we think it's to gain other people's approval. But it's actually to talk, we're communicating something to other people. We're trying to bring them a little bit of joy when we wear something or put on a little bit of makeup or do our hair. We're trying to make our world a bit more beautiful. So that's how I would define it.
It's almost as if the last words that you were saying about the importance of taking care of yourself and taking care of the image, because your image is not just the representation of who you are into this world, but it's also the respect you show to other people and the care for what they see and how they feel when they interact with you. And that's exactly what my grandma was telling me
Really?
in
Oh, I
almost identical words, which is so endearing, and
love
it's
that.
so beautiful.
So
And
nice.
it's true. I watched a documentary some years ago, and I think it was with my husband now, and it was about I think it was about Rolls-Royce,
Mm.
and it was about the bespoke versions, the custom-made ones, where they would put crystals in the car, and they had to be perfectly random. I know this isn't a contradiction in terms, but they had to create this randomness that was perfect. It wasn't like it was thought or intentionally random.
Yeah.
So there was so much care, and you think about what is the purpose of such a investment of time, of intellect, of emotion, and the pressure and the pressure the employees go through just to create something, on time and to be exactly perfect.
Yeah.
But that tells us so much about the humanity, because we strive for perfection, where we have this innate craving and longing, which is the key word that you said from in the beginning of this interview, that we have this longing for perfection and ideals.
Mm.
And I think that's God-given. And I
Yeah.
think this is just our life is just a way to get there. It's just this
Yeah.
transition.
In any way, in
Yeah.
however we choose to do it.
Mhm.
It's good to pursue it. And I think now we're taught to remove our not to be ideal, to kind of embrace pessimism, to
Mhm.
embrace reality, let's call it. But actually, if we're all gonna die anyway, you might as well
The
be.
fatalistic mindset. Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know where it comes from. I think because the world has taken away, like you said, globalization, for example, has taken the power away from the individual. Um, and if we all created a little bit more, then we'd have. When you're creating something, you're at least hopeful for that piece. You're just the hope. All of your hope can be put into that one piece that, when it's finished, is going to be beautiful. And you're not thinking about, will the world be a better place one day, and will I survive? You're just thinking, at the end of this sculpture, there's going to be something beautiful. So we can kind of channel our hope into little things rather than be a bit more existential and panic. There's actually a book I was going to recommend called Antique Dealer. This
Yes,
is
please.
it's a 1960s. It was it's published in the 60s, written in the 60s. This one I found in an antique shop, so it's a really lovely version. But I I always forget the author's name because this copy, but I will send it to you. So it was written by R.P. Way. It was written by an antique dealer who worked in the UK towards the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, with his father, and how he talks about the day-to-day adventures. It's so beautiful. So if anyone wants to read, I'm reading it, and the world hasn't changed at all when in terms of the lives of dealers. If anyone
Human
wants to
nature is
learn,
the same. It's the only constant in history that we have. We're always the same.
exactly, our inner thoughts and our
Mhm.
daily feelings, you know. So I will send it to you in writing in case you want to check it out or if you want to give it to people. And then there's another book, but I just remembered it now and I don't want to get up to get it, so I'll send you. It's I think it's by a Japanese author or a designer, and it talks about the beauty of everyday objects, and how in Japanese culture, I know you were saying that, you know, things don't have to be utilitarian, which I completely agree with, because I think a sign of prosperity and peace, not just financial, but like, you know, inner prosperity and peace is that we decorate, I think. But even more than that, even the utilitarian objects should be beautiful, because now we really have to use these are things that we really have to use, that are really a part of our everyday life. And so we have an obligation to make those things beautiful. So again, I'll get the name of the book and I'll give it to you if you want to put it or if you just wanted to check it out. But I learned a lot about beauty from that book. I don't remember the name. I think it's something, but I'll send it to you.
But a lot of the objects, everyday use objects, they had this aesthetic, decorative component. A lot of them, until
Back
very
then, yes.
recently, I think. And I
Yeah.
remember my grandma had this big bathtub, and the bathtub had, I don't know when it was made, probably in the 50s. It was very old. Unfortunately, it degraded too much for us to keep it. But it
Yeah.
had this beautiful legs. They were in the shape of owl feet
Oh,
with
amazing.
talons, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful to look at. It was
Yes.
very simple, yet it had this element which wasn't necessary, and people thought that way. And usually, the things that have that component, they come from a time where people thought of them to be used for
Yeah.
many decades, for a
Yeah.
lifetime even.
Yeah. Of
And
course.
that's what we don't have today. I think it's something to be consumed fast and replaced immediately.
Yeah. And I
It's not
think
just
sorry.
it's not just a matter of cost, I think,
Yes.
because we could
100%.
balance this out. It
Yeah,
doesn't require more.
of course.
Mm.
You can beautify things without spending too much money, you know? No, I mean, if we don't want to talk about the craftsmen who now are not really putting effort into figuring out how to make things beautiful in an affordable way, but I guess we could take that into our own hands. And and you know, it's important to think about the fact that if we want to think, why do people now not think of, like you said, making objects to be used for hundreds of years? Maybe because we're feeling a bit hopeless and pessimistic about the future. But actually, despite what's happening in the world all the time, and our access to it, I guess, makes us feel a bit hopeless. But can you imagine what it was like to live in the 1800s as someone who was just carving chairs? I mean, his life must have been unimaginably difficult. Why was he able to see, you know, the people who were building churches? And it's the concept of um, planting a tree not for you but for your great grandchildren. We don't have that anymore, and we blame it on the circumstances of our life and the state of the world. But actually, when has it ever been better than this? So the only thing we have control of is our pursuits. And if we, you know, people used to take decades or an entire lifetime to create one painting. We can't even imagine spending that much time on one thing that maybe we won't even see the end of. But maybe this is what's good for us, you know?
It's true. Sometimes taking the slower way
Yeah,
helps us achieve a lot more than doing things fast.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, spending years on a painting. Probably you have so many anecdotes about great artists that were not, you could not say within modern terms or terminology that they had a successful life while they were alive. Rather,
mm,
they became famous after their death.
yeah,
And we don't know if they suffered much or not, if they felt it to a very deep level. But I think a lot of them, they were so focused on doing something well and eliminating all the other uh, thoughts that are almost like parasites, thinking about, I want to achieve glory, I want to achieve this fast. And it's a different kind of glory that we pursue nowadays. It's so volatile, yet they were obviously, I think they were thinking about the next generations to come, and not just to leave something material, but also the immaterial part, the knowledge, the craft, everything that they gained to pass it on. And I think, yeah, as you reiterated many times, that's what we lack: the focus, and the thinking of the future generations.
And that's what as a dealer, but also I always tell people to become collectors, because there's nothing more tedious but also, adventurous and fun than looking through hundreds and hundreds of items that could seem useless or maybe useless to you, don't attract you, and then finding that one gem. um, that's that's what I that's what I love about what I do and about my daily activities. And that's, if you're not a by collecting, or don't even buy, honestly, don't buy, just go. It's um, antique collecting or viewing or experiencing is being able to go to a museum but touch everything. You can really, I mean, when I go to auction houses, and there was a recent auction of the collection of a really beloved auction antique dealer in London called Robert Kime. And it was such a big event in the country, and me and my dad went, and his pieces were historical, masterpieces, like the things he'd collected from around the world. And I couldn't believe that I could touch them, even though I grew up touching like wooden beams from Alhambra, where if they were in the V&A, you couldn't go near them. But if you came to our shop, of course you can touch them, you can feel them. So even if you're not buying antiques, just make it part of your fun shopping experience. Go touch them, pick them up, feel them. It'll make you feel good.
So you think that this is the best way to help preserve antiques, to give them attention?
Yes.
That's what we, like everyday citizens, that's what we
Yeah.
can do.
Give them
Because
attention.
Mhm.
Find, doesn't have to be really expensive pieces, or at all expensive at all. But once I don't know why I didn't buy it, because I don't smoke, but I regret it till today. It was in an antique fair. It was just a small set of three glass ashtrays from the 1920s Art Deco, and it was just
Wow.
green, pink, and yellow. Very simple. They were probably made in a factory, but back then, 100 years ago. They were so stunning. Everyone was standing around them, and they were £20 for the three of them. Everyone was standing around like, what is it? We're trying to figure out what it does. It was more beautiful than it was practical, even though when you figure out how to use it, of course, it's practical. But £20 for something like this, and you can just put it in your house and enjoy it, and it's going to bring you so much joy. I mean, look, for example, this candlestick, you can there is a seam, you can see the seam, which means it wasn't crafted by hand, but it's probably over 100 years old, and it's beautiful and it reflects the light, and I just, these things, sometimes when you buy, it's part of the fun of the trade, is when you buy something, when you buy a big piece, usually if it's coming from someone's house, they'll throw in some boxes with it. And they say, please just take these boxes with it, and it'll be full of stuff like this. So these things I
What
tend
a
to keep.
treasure.
Yeah, exactly. So you might think, that, oh, they're not exactly valuable. Am I really collecting antiques in that case? You are. It's over 100 years old, and it was, even the factories back then. If you look at the factories, their equipment were all beautiful. They took like three men to run these equipment, and everything was finished by hand. They use different materials and different colors. It's real glass, even if it's cheaper glass. So just start collecting little things and then save up for the bigger things, because that's also worth it. And it's also an investment for you. It's a good place to keep your money. I will always say that.